quick intros, and if I forget anything, feel free to mention it yourself. But Sonia is a Foresight board member, and she's the author of the book 100 Plus, which lays out how longevity and how the longevity revolution will impact like every part of our lives. It's a fantastic book. I recommend you all get it. And she's also the founder of 100 Plus Capital, which invests in companies that impact longevity both directly and also indirectly by bringing us better food and water. And then we have Sarah here, who's the founder of Daphnia Labs, which searches for drugs to extend lifespan. And she's the founder of the Longevity Research Institute, which is a research nonprofit that is dedicating to accelerating translational science by testing the most promising longevity interventions first on animals to see which ones we should test on humans too. And you'd think that this is more common sense, but somehow it's not. And then we have Mark here again, who you've just heard from about Forever Labs. Now that we all know who's here, let's talk about what we're not going to talk about, which is no definitions. We're not going to talk about is it longevity or is it health span or is it preventative medicine or is it anti-aging. Just pick your favorite and be clear about it. And we're not going to talk about why it's important. I guess we're preaching to the choir here, right? And we're not going to talk about whether it's possible or not. Because there's enough talks by those speakers out there in case you doubt any of this. And I'm hoping for this to be interactive, so I will just start with a few questions, but feel free to shout out other questions. For the ones that haven't been to a Foresight Salon yet, and I'm hoping the same holds true for Aikora, this should be interactional, right? This is a conversation. Don't be blended by the fact that we're on stage. So please shout out whatever you want to notify here. Okay, let's start maybe with the first question to all of you. What approach to advancing longevity are you working on, and what makes you think that that's like the best shot? That's the lever to pull.
So at Daphnia, we are doing, and I'm going to say a bunch of words here and go into more detail in a minute, we're doing phenotypic lifespan screens for small molecules in Daphnia magna. So what does that mean? Phenotypic. So traditional drug discovery says we think we know what pathway that causes the disease we want to interfere with. We want to block that causal mechanism that causes disease, and so we pick a protein and we find things that inhibit that protein, and we sort of do this depth-first search of, okay, does this work? Does it work in water? Does it work in cells? Does it work in an animal? Phenotypic screen says we have an outcome we care about, and we're sort of going to cut out the middleman, and we're going to say, okay, what causes this outcome? This is actually where most successful drugs that get through FDA trials successfully do, frequently with something like, okay, we're going to look for drugs that kill tumors. So in this case, we're going to look for drugs that make animals live longer. Now, you can't do that with a mouse. That'll take 3 years. So we're using a small organism, a small crustacean called Daphnia. It's a water flea. It's transparent. You can it's a couple millimeters long. It's a little bigger than a worm. You can actually use a high-resolution camera and just watch them through their lifespan. And then that makes it a machine learning problem. That's an image processing problem. You have this video. You can track them. You can see how long they live. You can see how active they are. You can see how their physiology changes. You can watch their heartbeat. And so you can say, okay, what features are predictive of mortality? What's living long? And now you can test thousands of drugs in parallel, and you're looking at, okay, so now I can look for life-extending drugs. We've barely explored the space of what kinds of drugs can extend life, prevent the diseases of aging. Some of the big ones like rapamycin were accidental discoveries. So they're out there in the unbiased screens they have. Reliably, if you're looking for things that extend life in worms or extend life in mice, you get a few percent of just all drugs are life-extending. So the base rate is decent. And the base rate of translation between invertebrates and vertebrates is pretty high, something like 7% by my last calculation. So we have these conserved mechanisms that can be affected by drugs to hopefully slow the onset of aging, the onset of age-related disease, and we just need to reduce the cost per experiment of doing these very large-scale screens to find out where they are. So
easy.
Yeah.
Easy, right. So what am I doing to promote longevity? I started out my career, as many of you know, in the longevity space by writing a book, 100 Plus, How the Coming Age of Longevity Will Change Everything. And I wrote that book back like 6 years, maybe 7 years ago now, because back then, not very many people were interested in this space. It was not mainstreamed. It was a really fringe type thing, filled with a lot of fringe type people, some of whom are here still. You've weathered the storm, and you're still now you're part of the mainstream. And the point of the book was to really bring awareness to the idea of increasing health span. That's the term I like to use, because it's not just about lifespan, it's about health span. We want to be healthy. And so the point of that book was to bring awareness to it, to get people involved in it from all walks of life, from scientists and who are doing the work, and philanthropists and government agencies and corporations and investors and all the different people you need to make something happen in society, to make a revolution happen. So I wrote that book. It got a lot of press. A lot of people talked about it, and then after that, there was sort of this effect where longevity really did become mainstream. And I'm not taking full credit for it because I can't do that, but it helped. And I was talking to someone the other day, and they asked me what I'm doing, and I said, well, I'm investing now, and I still speak. I'm still on the longevity has legs. I still get invited to conferences all over the world. But my main focus now, my focus back then was on trying to get people interested in the space. My job there is done. That doesn't need to happen anymore. Lots of people are interested in this space. That job is over. There's no position open there anymore. So I'm done with that. And so then the next step to me, personally, because I'm interested in ushering in a longevity revolution, is, well, okay, so what's the next step? There's all this cool tech out there. How do we get the tech from the labs into people's homes, to people? And from my point of view, the best way to do that is through the vehicle of companies. Right? Government funding is great, and it helps a lot of the early research, but really, if you want to get something widespread, it's through properly functioning companies that make a profit, right? And so that's what I'm focused on now. So now I'm investing in longevity companies, and that doesn't just mean a company that's doing work on longevity. It means a company that has a great idea, is scientifically, there's some real science there, and it's doing something that's really going to have a big impact. And like Allison said, it doesn't have to be just directly on, say, repairing the body. It could be something that affects our health, like, I feel like we do have a very dirty food and water supply, and so to the extent that we can fix that, that's going to help us with our health span extension. So I do sort of the indirect and the direct investing. So it has to be, a good idea, a great team, a solid science, with a really good business model. If you have a great scientific idea and no business model, I hate to tell you this, but it's not going to go anywhere, and it's not going to be useful in the sense that it's not going to get into people's homes, and that's my end goal. And so that's what I'm doing now, and I'm trying to usher in the really cool tech to get to the consumer, right? And that's a long process. There's all these different things. The teams have to work. The product has to resonate. You do have to make money, right? And so I've been spending my time identifying companies, investing in them, and then helping them. Which personally actually has been the most fun part of this job. I wasn't really expecting to have so much fun doing it, but if they email me and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a head of marketing, I can't find someone," and I start networking and trying to help them figure out who they can hire, it's actually that is in service of the longevity goal. So that is my current job, focused on the longevity revolution, and once that happens, then I'll change jobs again.
Great. All right. Well, that would be a good problem to have then.
Yes, that would be great.
Well, I'll try not to be redundant, because I talked quite extensively about what I'm doing, but I can talk a little bit about the why. I think it's important and helps. So one is, I think, by creating kind of a community of people that are interested, we can be a conduit, we can be maybe a catalyst to kind of break the trance amongst the clients that bank this asset and have this asset. But I think it's important. So as a practicing biologist, I've become extremely humble. We don't understand biology as much as we'd like to think, and there's a lot of dark matter in it. And so we're banking not just what we know, but we're banking what we don't know. And so my cells are 4 years younger than I am, and I can go back and I can look at the difference. And there's differences that we can't even look at yet, and we don't even know to look for yet. And so I think that part of what we're doing is we're building a potential that goes beyond just like, just put young cells in your old self.
Oh man, that's a nice way to describe it. I always love that. Like whenever you do updates, it's like, now your stem cells are another year younger than you are. All right, so I think to me, in terms of like, if we think about like, okay, what bottlenecks are holding like the space back, right? Like I think, Sarah, you're working on like, both longevity research, but on the side of it, like I went to your website, you also work on fixing a ton of other problems that are like in the scientific ecosystem generally by, really trying to get people to publish their result, to publish their data early, and so on and so forth. And I think Sonia, by like investing, you're like really trying to boost companies, right? Which is like has a pretty like short term like practical impact. And Mark, you bring a product to the line. So what do you think are those the most important like bottlenecks to tackle, or is there one that we're missing?
So on the science side, on the early stage of the research and development story, there are some things that really could be improved. And one of them is really about methods, about what kinds of experimental models are you using, and do those predict what's going to actually be a cure, a treatment for humans. So one thing I like to talk about a lot is we keep mice at room temperature for studies. Turns out normal room temperature, lab temperature, makes mice get cancer faster. If you keep them a little warmer and they're a little bit more comfortable, they live longer. So what does that mean for everything that we have found treats cancer in mice or makes mice live longer or something? Maybe you're just compensating for an unhealthy environment. So for every kind of experiment that we think is predictive of what's going to help people someday, we have to question, are we measuring what we think we're measuring? And sort of often the most important discovery a scientific field can make is that their starting assumptions are wrong. So I think going back and looking at methods is one of these things that sounds unsexy. You're talking about what conditions you treat your mice in, but that can completely make or break whether the research that comes out of it fails or succeeds in the clinic. So I think that's important.
Everyone working on the science, I think Sarah is a good one to ask you on like, are we doing it right? Yeah, Sonia.
The poor mice, they were probably just so stressed out because they were cold. The biggest problem I see is this issue with pure researchers getting into business. And oftentimes they'll try to partner with somebody who's in business, but then the partnership doesn't really work. And from my point of view, the partnership is not working because the expectations are wrong from the get-go. I mean, the scientists, and you can understand it, want to control their work, right? They've spent all this time and they've created all this amazing science, and they want to be the ones to commercialize it. But they don't have that skill set necessarily. And so then they partner with somebody who has the skill set, but then they don't let that person do anything because they want to control everything. And like that's a scene, a show I see over and over again, which is always very saddening to me, because if the relationship just worked out better, the company would work out better, and then we'd have access to all these amazing innovations faster.
It's a hard problem, though. Like I remember, we talked about this a little bit because at our technical competitions, we basically bring scientists together. They kind of like work two days really hard to like bring about like a project proposal that may make a dent in like longevity, for example. And then afterwards, it's really hard. Like what happens to those project proposals? They're often like really, really good. And then I think you and I were once brainstorming, well, maybe we should do like a matchmaking day where we like hook up like scientists with entrepreneurs, but you also have some qualms about that, or?
Well, I think it's just a case of the right match. Sometimes I think a match happens just because they think, well, he's an entrepreneur, he's a scientist, it's going to work. But maybe their personalities don't really work together, and they don't respect each other's whatever issues each personality has. And I think the matchmaking is really, really difficult to do. Particularly, I think science requires a certain type of personality. Somebody who just won't give up. Somebody who's really stubborn, right? And getting somebody who can work really well with that kind of personality is difficult. And sometimes it's just too extreme and it just won't work with anybody who's, maybe you get someone massively flexible and it still doesn't work. So I think there's got to be the matchmaking, and there's also got to be the education, some kind of nicely worded education to the scientists that it's okay for them to give up a little bit of control, right? I mean, the thing they invented is not going to go away, right? And they're still going to get credit for it. It's just they're going to get way more credit if it gets commercialized and becomes $1 billion company, right?
It's a prototype. Yep.
Yeah.
Maybe Christine Peterson should start a matchmaking
Right.
service
Christine
because
would
she
be
knows
great
so
at that.
well.
I
All
think
right.
so.
Okay, Mark.
I'm going to agree with Sonia. As a scientist, I was very lucky to have a business savvy CEO, co-founder, and we would not be where we are today if it weren't for him. I mean, you come talk to me, and I'm going to put you in touch with Steve, and it's going to be better for it. We're going to be better off for it, both of us. You need that kind of tension. It's like a creative tension between two people that are like, scientists are, ridiculous. They can, because they're driven by that, this next thing, and like, oh my God, if I was the CEO of Forever Labs, divest. But if my, CEO is he needs me too, and so I think that's a real bottleneck. It's at some point the rubber meets the road, and there has to be that creative tension that like really, kind of creates a business entity, not just a science project.
If you could for a moment, think really big, right? And think about okay, where would you ideally want the space to be in, let's say, 5 to 10 years? You can pick the one that you most like to talk about. And then, what can people in this room here today do as a community to get there faster?
So I do think we're going to see the first geroprotectors within that time frame. We have drugs entering the clinic that are, rapamycin analogs and so on. The clinical trials are beginning. So this is, we're going to see things that modulate underlying aging processes and maybe have applications for particular diseases in the next 5 years. And I think more volume of the community, more companies, more. There is a growing research community, but more different approaches, I think, is just going to increase the number of things heading through the pipeline.
So there's a lot I'd like to see, but I don't know, 5
Give
to 10
us
years.
your wish list.
Right. I would like to see version 1 senolytics working in 5 years, and other people working on the version 2 and version 3. And same with gene therapy for aging. Have the version 1 maybe almost done by that time, and next version's on their way.
I'd like to see a right to try for people that are over the age of 90. I'd like to see, they're terminal, and I think that it could do a lot for humanity. People could experiment a little more aggressively.
Neat. Okay, so here's some things to pick up on. Are there any questions? We have time for a few questions.
How much more support nonprofit does there need to be versus investing, and how do you think about it?
Sure, I'll answer. I'll try to answer that. That's very frustrating, right? Because I can only invest in things that come to me with a viable business model, and if it's only in one type of longevity, like for instance, if you think about ways to fight aging as two really upper level, if you think there's this sort of the whole body method, I feel like scientists are sort of divided on this. There's the whole body method or the repair piece by piece method, right? And I actually would have expected to see more of the piece by now, right? Like more of the repair growing organs and you see some of that, but not that much. And the ones you see are not really, so, and there's except for you. But I am seeing a lot of the more global fixes, really viable, great, exciting, innovative companies on the global level, and that's sort of interesting to me too. So yeah, it can be frustrating, it can be interesting, and I think it's always great to have lots of funding at the front end, from governments and nonprofits, and I'm on board of the Teal Foundation as well, and we do have a program called Breakout Labs, and we were funding companies in the space where they were too late to get the government funding, but too early to get VC funding, and so we were filling that gap. So there's all these different ways that can happen.
Michael, so I think what's really interesting is that there's billions of people on the planet, and there's been billions of lives, and they all die almost the same time. Like death is very strongly reinforced by nature. It's there's not a random way to all of a sudden just live a lot longer. which means there's probably multiple ways that we can make ourselves live longer, many, many ways, probably more than and so I think that you do need that research, academic, nonprofit, creative kind of, because once you start a company, you're married to this mission. So I think that it has to be both, and it's going to be both for quite some time.
Sarah, do you want to comment?
Sure. Well, I can speak to some of the nonprofit side because I run a nonprofit, and there are, in fact, some avenues that look promising for aging that aren't adequately addressable by the business side, and those are things. In LRI's case, we're picking up on drugs that seem to have extended life in mammals, but they may or may not actually be business prospects. So there are old generic drugs. Depronyl is a Parkinson's drug that's been around for decades. And decades ago, they were finding it extends life in mice. So let's see if that replicates. Is this a real thing? There are natural products. There are things produced in the body. Melatonin is available over the counter. It's not a super expensive thing, but there's many years of research making it look like it might be delaying the diseases of aging. So things like that probably deserve to be funded in the nonprofit context. The other thing I would bring up is that there has now been a little bit of a trend for some of the aging-focused VC firms to help with company formation. So you were mentioning this repair organ replacement thing, and I remember years ago seeing this gentleman, Eric Lagasse, who had academic research showing that you could regrow livers by putting liver cells in lymph nodes. And that was miraculous. And at the time, he couldn't get funding for this as a company because he was a scientist, not a CEO. And then recently I saw, there actually was an investment firm that put him together with a team. And I was so impressed. It was somebody actually did the legwork to deal with that valley of death problem of great academic research and no commercial team yet. So I think it actually can be done, but it's very impressive when it's done, and I'm seeing examples of this happening.
Great. One last question, and then as you answer, maybe also make it your last notes to the audience. So if there's any updates or so that you want to share, then feel free. Eric.
So for each of you, what do you think is the most impactful place or technique at the moment, maybe to intervene? Maybe start with Forever Labs and Mars. When is the best time to put your stencils back in?
The best time to put them back in. I'm trying to find that out as fast as I can. It seems about 40 is where you have this inverse exponential. The slope rate starts to pick up, and the decline in the cells, and then obviously, and also the exponential increase in age-related disease. So I think somewhere around 40, and I'm 44, so the clock's ticking. So I'm working on it.
Any last words?
Last words. I think that this is a green field. There's so much opportunity here. And we don't even know what the biggest ones are yet. So I'm optimistic about the space. I love working in this space, and that it's cool to see it just starting to snowball, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm going to turn it around, actually. So I'm going to answer that question first. Yeah. One of the things that I'm seeing now that I didn't see, say, maybe 8 months ago, so a lot has changed in 8 months, is practically every single longevity company I've talked to is using AI. And that wasn't happening 8 months ago. And so now I feel like I need to become an AI expert in order to evaluate all of these companies because they're all using it. I mean, it's really quite incredible, and I think that's a good sign because I think that means the data is gonna move forward faster, and we're gonna find things quicker, and things are just gonna happen at a better pace.
Factor.
Yeah. And then back to what can you do now? I don't know. Personally, I do intermittent fasting. I think that's shown to be really effective, and it's good for you to not be overweight. So that's my advice.
No, in terms of what an individual can do, so far we're at the stage where it's a diet and exercise kind of thing. That's why we're all working on the new stuff. I think there's both potential for this late in life dramatic reversal kind of senolytic stuff, and potentially also these metabolic changes that you start at midlife or something like that, and just straightforwardly prevention of age-related disease.
Okay, sweet. Thank you so much for joining us on the panel. That doesn't mean the conversation's over. You now have 10 minutes to grab your favorite speaker before we're going to reconvene here again for panel number 2. Thank you so much.